Hey, it's Andrew. Tonight, you're in for 3 bone-chilling stories that people say really happened. Places that should feel safe became sources of dread, and ordinary nights turned into moments of pure terror. So get comfortable or not. These are 3 true horror stories that could happen to anyone, maybe even you. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I love seeing how far my stories reach. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Now let's start. Story 1. The Observation Room. Hi Andrew. This is Dr. Elena Reyes. I recently became a member of your channel, and I just wanted to say how much I enjoy your content. I've been a fan of horror stories since childhood, and I'd love to share a personal experience with you. I hope you might consider including it in one of your future videos. I was working the overnight shift at Westbridge Psychiatric Hospital back then. Not as a doctor yet, I was still completing my residency, which meant I got the assignments nobody else wanted. The 3rd floor was reserved for patients requiring intensive observation. Heavy doors, reinforced windows, and a staff ratio that never felt quite adequate for the level of care needed. My shift had just started, and I was doing the usual rounds, checking patient charts and medications. Most of the senior staff were heading out, their footsteps echoing down the long corridor in a way that made the building feel emptier than it was. I was settling into the observation station when the charge nurse, Margaret, stopped by my desk. She looked tired in a way that went beyond one long shift. She said a new patient had been admitted that afternoon to room 317. Transfer from county lockup after a psychiatric evaluation. The file was thin, which was unusual. Name listed as Jonathan Crow, 34 years old, no significant medical history documented. The admission notes mentioned acute psychosis with dissociative features, but the details were vague. Margaret told me to check on him every 30 minutes and not to engage beyond basic welfare checks. Her voice had an edge to it, like she was warning me about something she couldn't quite name. I remember looking at the monitor for room 317. The camera showed a man sitting on the edge of his bed, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't moving at all, not rocking, not pacing, not displaying any of the restless energy most acute admissions showed. Just sitting there, staring at the wall opposite his bed. At 11 p.m., I did my first in-person check. The hallway to 317 was at the far end of the ward, past the day room and through a set of security doors that required my badge. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that persistent electrical drone that becomes white noise after enough hours. When I reached his door, I looked through the observation window first. He was in the exact same position as on the monitor. Same posture, same angle, like he hadn't moved a muscle in hours. I knocked and identified myself before entering. Protocol. He didn't turn around or acknowledge me in any way. I asked if he needed anything: water, medication, someone to talk to. Nothing. I documented the check and left, feeling a strange relief when the door locked behind me. By 1 a.m. I checked on him 3 more times. Each time he was in that same position. Not sleeping, not moving, just sitting. The 3rd time, I noticed his eyes were open, fixed on a specific point on the wall. There was nothing there, just blank painted concrete, but he stared at it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. At 2:30 a.m., the monitors started acting up. Room 317's camera feed flickered, showing static for a few seconds before clearing. I made a note to have maintenance check it in the morning. But when it flickered again, I saw something that made me stand up from my chair. In that brief moment of static clearing, Jonathan wasn't sitting on the bed anymore. He was standing directly in front of the camera, face inches from the lens, staring into it. My heart jumped. I quickly switched to the live feed. He was back on the bed, same position as before, like he'd never moved. I told myself it was a glitch, maybe a delay in the feed. Old building, old equipment, these things happened. But then I heard it. A sound coming from the intercom system in room 317. We had two-way communication capability for emergencies. The speaker was crackling with interference, and through it came a voice. Not Jonathan's voice, at least I didn't think it was. It was distorted, layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. The voice said, "Dr. Reyes, you should check the wall." I froze. The intercom in his room shouldn't have been active. Patients couldn't access it from their side. And how did he know my name? I hadn't introduced myself beyond medical staff during my checks. I looked at the monitor again. Jonathan was still sitting, but now his head was turned slightly toward the camera. His lips weren't moving, but the voice came through the intercom again. "The wall, Dr. Reyes. Look at what's written on the wall." Every instinct told me not to go down there. But I was responsible for his welfare, and if he was in distress or experiencing a severe psychotic episode, I needed to document it and possibly call for backup. I radioed security to let them know I was doing an unscheduled check on 317 and might need assistance. The walk down that hallway felt longer than it should have. Each step echoed too loudly. When I reached his door and looked through the observation window, Jonathan was standing now, facing the wall. He had his back to me, arms hanging loosely at his sides. I unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. "Mr. Crow, I need you to turn around and face me." He didn't move. I stepped inside, keeping my distance, and that's when I saw what he'd been staring at. On the wall, scratched into the paint in thin, precise lines, were words. Dozens of them, covering a 6-foot section from floor to ceiling. But these weren't random scrawls. They were names. Full names, dates, and room numbers. I recognized some of them immediately. Former patients. People who had been on this floor years ago, some of them before I'd even started working here. But Jonathan had only been admitted that afternoon. There was no way he could know these names or have had time to scratch them all into the wall. I took a step back, my hand reaching for my radio. That's when Jonathan spoke, his real voice this time, quiet and eerily calm. "They told me you'd be working tonight. They wanted me to show you." "Who told you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned around slowly. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot but focused. Too focused. The ones who never left. The ones still in the walls. I called for backup immediately. 2 security officers arrived within minutes and escorted Jonathan back to his bed while I examined the wall more closely. The scratches were deep, carved with something sharp. I checked his hands, his fingernails. Nothing. No blood, no broken nails, no indication he'd done this with his bare hands. The senior psychiatrist on call arrived around 4 a.m. Dr. Hammond had been with the hospital for 20 years. I showed him the wall, explained what happened. He studied the names for a long time, then pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "I recognize these names," he said quietly. "These are patients we lost. Suicides mostly. Over the past 15 years. "How would he know?" I asked. Dr. Hammond didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the wall, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "Room 317 has a history. We don't use it often. When we do, patients sometimes report experiences. Hearing things, seeing things. We've attributed it to the isolation, the stress of acute episodes. And now," he turned to look at me. "Now I'm not sure what to think." We moved Jonathan to a different room that night. The next morning, maintenance was called to repaint the wall in 317. When they stripped the paint, they found more scratches underneath, older ones with more names, more dates. Layers and layers of them going back decades. Jonathan was transferred to a long-term facility 2 days later. His evaluation showed severe psychotic disorder, but there was something in his file that caught my attention. A note from his intake interview. When asked why he'd requested to be placed in room 317 specifically, he'd said, "Because that's where they told me to go. The ones who are still waiting. I don't work at Westbridge anymore. I finished my residency and moved to a different hospital across the state. But sometimes I still think about that wall, about all those names scratched into layers of paint. And I wonder about the patients who came after Jonathan, the ones placed in room 317 without knowing its history. Because here's what I never told anyone. On my last night at Westbridge, 3 months after Jonathan's transfer, I was passing through the 3rd floor to drop off some files. Room 317 had been freshly painted, repaired, and put back into rotation. There was a new patient inside. I looked through the observation window just out of curiosity. The patient was sitting on the bed, perfectly still, hands folded in their lap, staring at the wall. And on that wall, barely visible in the dim light, I could see fresh scratches beginning to form. I didn't stay to see what they would write. I left the files at the nurse's station and walked out. Some rooms, I learned, hold on to their history no matter how many times you paint over it. Mason, thank you for sharing your story. What I've learned from it is that some places carry echoes of the past, and sometimes those echoes find ways to make themselves heard. Now let me narrate story number 2 sent by Kieran. Story 2, The Roommate Application. Hey, this is Kieran. I'm sharing my story for the first time on any channel and I hope you all will like it. I'm using my real name, but I've changed the names of the other people involved in my actual encounter, so it doesn't make anyone obvious. 2 years ago, I was desperately searching for an apartment in the city. My budget was tight, student loans were crushing me, and the rental market was brutal. After weeks of dead ends, I found a listing online that seemed too good to be true. 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, rent split with 1 roommate, utilities included. The post was simple, almost bare bones. Quiet tenant preferred. Must be comfortable with flexible living arrangements. I messaged the poster, someone named Alex Carter. The response came within minutes. Polite, professional, suggesting we meet at a coffee shop to discuss the arrangement. I agreed, relieved to finally have a promising lead. Alex arrived exactly on time, which I appreciated. Mid-30s, well-dressed, soft-spoken. We talked about the apartment, the neighborhood, basic roommate logistics. Everything seemed normal. Alex explained they worked from home, kept irregular hours, but were generally very quiet and respected privacy. The rent was incredibly affordable, the location perfect, and I was running out of options. I said yes before I'd even seen the place. Great, Alex said, smiling. I'll send you the lease and keys. You can move in this weekend. I travel frequently for work, so you'll have the place to yourself most of the time. I should have asked more questions. Why was the rent so cheap? Why was Alex so eager to lock down a roommate they just met? But I was desperate, and desperation makes you ignore red flags that should be obvious. The apartment was on the 4th floor of an older building. When I arrived with my boxes that Saturday, Alex wasn't there. They'd left the keys in the mailbox with a note. Welcome home. Your room is the one on the left. Please don't go into the room on the right. That's my space. Privacy is important to both of us, I'm sure you understand. The apartment was clean, sparsely furnished. The living room had a couch, a small TV, a bookshelf mostly empty. The kitchen was functional but minimal. My room was decent-sized, unfurnished except for a bed frame. The door to Alex's room was closed, and per the note, I didn't try to open it. The first week was uneventful. I barely saw Alex. Occasionally I'd hear movement in their room late at night, footsteps, the sound of something being dragged across the floor, but nothing alarming. We'd exchanged maybe 3 sentences in passing. Alex was always polite but distant, which suited me fine. I wasn't looking for a best friend, just a place to sleep. Then the small things started. Objects in the kitchen moved. I'd leave a coffee mug on the counter before work, and when I came home, it would be in the sink, washed and dried. Groceries I'd bought would be rearranged in the fridge. My laundry, which I'd left in the washer, would be folded neatly on my bed when I returned from class. At first, I thought Alex was just being considerate, maybe overly tidy. But it felt intrusive. I hadn't asked for help with my laundry, and the idea of someone going through my clothes while I was out made me uncomfortable. I left a note in the kitchen. "Hey Alex, thanks for the help, but I prefer to handle my own stuff. Let's keep our spaces separate." The next morning, there was a response written below mine in neat, careful handwriting. Of course, apologies. I sometimes forget boundaries when I'm trying to be helpful. Fair enough. I appreciated the acknowledgement. But then the noises from Alex's room started getting stranger. No longer just footsteps or objects moving. Now there were voices. Multiple voices, sometimes overlapping, like Alex was having conversations with several people. But I never saw anyone else enter or leave the apartment. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat up immediately, heart pounding. The hallway light was off, but I could see a figure standing in my doorway. Tall, thin, silhouetted against the faint glow from the street outside. "Alex," I called out, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, perfectly still, for what felt like an eternity. Then it stepped back slowly and pulled the door closed without a sound. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back against the wall, lights on, door locked. In the morning I checked the apartment. Alex's door was still closed. No sign anyone had been up during the night. I decided to confront the situation. I knocked on Alex's door around noon. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. That evening I heard Alex moving around in there. I knocked immediately. The movement stopped. After a long silence, Alex's voice came through the door. "Yes. Can we talk? I need to discuss something. I'm busy right now. Can it wait?" "Not really. Someone came into my room last night." Another silence. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about. I was asleep." "Alex, I saw someone in my doorway." "Maybe you were dreaming. Old buildings make strange sounds. Shadows play tricks." The conversation felt wrong. The tone was off, like I was talking to someone reading from a script. I didn't push further. Instead, I started spending more time out of the apartment, coming home only to sleep, and even then, I kept my door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. A week later, I came home to find my room had been rearranged. Not drastically, but enough to notice. My desk was angled differently. My books were organized by color instead of how I'd left them. Pictures on my wall had been straightened. I went straight to Alex's door and pounded on it. "What the hell, Alex? You went into my room?" No response. I kept knocking. Finally, the door opened a crack. Alex stood there, face partially hidden in shadow. "I needed to retrieve something I'd left in there before you moved in," Alex said calmly. "I didn't touch your belongings." "Yes, you did. Everything's been moved." I was very careful. "I'm sorry if I upset you." The door closed before I could respond. I stood there, furious and confused. What could Alex have possibly left in my room? And why not just ask me to get it? That night, I decided to search my room thoroughly. I checked under the bed, in the closet, behind furniture. In the back corner of the closet, behind a loose section of baseboard, I found something. A small black notebook, spiral-bound, with a rubber band wrapped around it. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The pages were filled with notes. Dates, times, observations. About me. Subject arrives home 6:47 p.m. seems tired. Doesn't check mail. Subject left lights on in bedroom all night. Possible fear response. Subject ordered takeout. Same restaurant as Tuesday. Patterns forming. The entries went back weeks, starting from the day I'd moved in. Page after page of detailed observations about my routine, my habits, even my mood. The handwriting was meticulous, almost mechanical. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of every page, then put the notebook back exactly where I'd found it. I didn't know what to do. Confronting Alex felt dangerous now. Calling the police seemed like an overreaction. I had no proof of a crime, just creepy notes. I decided to stay with a friend that night and figure out my next move. I packed a bag quietly, not wanting to alert Alex. As I was leaving, I heard the door to Alex's room open. I didn't look back. I just walked faster. My friend Sarah lived across town. I showed her the photos of the notebook. She was horrified and insisted I call the police. I did, explaining the situation, expecting them to tell me there was nothing they could do. Instead, the officer on the phone asked for the address. He said they'd send someone to check it out and advised me not to return alone. 2 officers went to the apartment that night. They called me an hour later. Alex's room was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. Just bare walls and floor. But on the walls they found more notes, written directly on the paint in black marker. Observations about previous tenants. Names I didn't recognize. Dates going back years. The lease I'd signed wasn't real. The name Alex Carter didn't match any official records for the building. The actual owner of the apartment, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, had been in a nursing home for 3 years. Her family had been trying to sell the place but hadn't found a buyer. They had no idea someone had been living there. The police searched the building and found evidence that someone had been squatting in the apartment for at least 2 years, possibly longer. They'd intercepted mail, forged documents, and rotated through tenants every few months. The roommate arrangement was a scam, but also something darker. A way to observe people, study them, for reasons no one could determine. Alex was never found. The apartment was eventually cleared and sold. I got my deposit back, ironically, from Mrs. Chen's family, who felt terrible about what had happened. I still have the photos of that notebook on my phone. Sometimes I scroll through them, reading those clinical observations about my life. Subject seems lonely. Minimal social contact. Subject follows predictable patterns. Vulnerable. The worst part isn't that someone was watching me. It's that they were right. I was lonely. I was vulnerable. I was so desperate for affordable housing that I ignored every warning sign and walked right into a trap. I live in a different city now, in a place I researched thoroughly before signing anything. I check references, verify identities, trust my instincts when something feels off. And I never, ever respond to listings that seem too good to be true. Because sometimes they're not just scams. Sometimes there's something much worse. Honestly, stories like Kieran's are the kind that make you double-check doors, locks, and even the simplest routines. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see, it's what you can't see. Now let's move to the final story. Story 3, The Tenant in 4B. Hello there. Love your channel because I am a diehard fan of the true horror genre. I want to remain anonymous, and I have changed the name of the street as well due to privacy reasons. I moved into an apartment building on Riverside Drive in 2015. The building was old, early 1900s construction with high ceilings, crown molding, and hardwood floors that groaned under every step. I had viewed the unit during the afternoon and it seemed perfect. Spacious, good natural light, close to work, and the rent was within my budget. I signed the lease the same day. I didn't notice anything unusual until the first week. The building had 6 floors and I was on the 4th. My apartment, 4C, sat at the end of the hallway. There was only one other unit on my floor, 4B, directly across from mine. I never saw my neighbor. Not once in the first 2 weeks. No sounds of movement, no lights under the door, nothing. I assumed the unit was vacant or the tenant worked opposite hours. The landlord, Mr. Pacheco, was an older man who managed the building himself. When I asked him about 4B during a chance encounter in the lobby, he gave me a strange look. "Tenant keeps to themselves," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Been here longer than most. Pays on time, no complaints. That's all that matters." It was an odd response, but I let it go. I had my own life to focus on. New job, new city, new routines. The building was quiet, which I appreciated. Most of the other tenants were older, retired folks who didn't make much noise. Then one night, about 3 weeks after I moved in, I woke up to footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate steps moving back and forth outside my door. I checked the time. 3:17 a.m. I listened, trying to place the sound. The footsteps would pace from one end of the hall to the other, pause, then start again. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark except for the emergency exit light at the far end. I couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps continued, getting closer to my door, then retreating. This went on for 20 minutes. I almost called Mr. Pacheco but felt foolish. Maybe someone couldn't sleep and was just walking off anxiety. When the footsteps finally stopped, I heard a door close softly. 4B. The next morning I checked the hallway. Nothing unusual. No signs anyone had been pacing there for half the night. I mentioned it to Mrs. Ling, an elderly woman who lived on the 3rd floor, when we passed each other getting mail. "Oh, you heard them too," she said matter-of-factly. "The tenant in 4B walks at night. As for years. You'll get used to it. Do you know who lives there?" I asked. She paused, sorting her mail. "I've never seen them. Not in 15 years of living here. Some people value their privacy. 15 years. Never seen. Something about that didn't sit right." The footsteps became a regular occurrence. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always the same pattern. Back and forth, pause, repeat. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept me awake. I started wearing earplugs to bed. About a month in, I noticed something else. A smell. It would drift into the hallway around the same time as the footsteps. Not quite rotten, not quite medicinal. Something in between, like old flowers left too long in stagnant water. One night, frustrated and sleep-deprived, I decided to confront whoever was in 4B. When the footsteps started, I got out of bed, pulled on a robe, and opened my door. The hallway was empty. But the footsteps hadn't stopped. I could hear them clearly, moving from the far end toward me, but there was no one there. I stood frozen, watching the empty corridor as the sound passed right in front of me, inches away, and continued to the other end. Then the door to 4B opened. Just a crack, maybe 6 inches. The smell hit me immediately, stronger now, overwhelming. I couldn't see inside. The apartment beyond the door was completely dark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely steady. No response. The door stayed open, that thin slice of darkness just sitting there. I took a step back toward my apartment. Then I heard it. A voice, quiet and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in a very long time. "You shouldn't be out here." I didn't wait to hear more. I went back inside, locked my door, and sat with my back against it until morning. When I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, the door to 4B was closed again. I called Mr. Pacheco first thing that morning and demanded to know who was in 4B. He was quiet for a long time. "Look," he finally said, "that tenant has special circumstances. Medical conditions that require isolation. They don't interact with other residents. As long as they're not bothering you." "They're pacing the hallway every night at 3 a.m., I interrupted. "Have you actually seen them?" "No, but..." Then there's nothing I can do. They pay their rent. They have a right to their apartment. I hung up, unsatisfied. Over the next few days, I tried to research the building's history. Property records showed 4B had been continuously occupied since 1987. Always the same tenant name on the lease, E. Marsh. No first name, just an initial. I asked around the building. The few neighbors I managed to talk to gave similar responses. They'd heard the footsteps, smelled the odd scent, but no one had ever seen E. Marsh. Most had learned to ignore it. Old buildings have their quirks, one man told me with a shrug. But I couldn't ignore it. The footsteps were getting louder, lasting longer. Sometimes they'd start as early as midnight and continue until dawn. And the smell was seeping into my apartment now, even with my door and windows closed. One evening, I decided to wait in the hallway. I positioned myself near the stairwell around 2:30 a.m., armed with my phone's flashlight and a terrible plan to finally see who or what was making those sounds. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard a door unlock. 4B. I aimed my flashlight down the hall and waited. The door opened slowly all the way this time. The smell rolled out like a physical thing, making my eyes water. And then I saw a figure step into the hallway. Tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown that hung off their frame. Their face was in shadow, but I could see their hands, pale and skeletal, fingers too long, joints bending at wrong angles. The figure began to pace just like I'd heard every night. But now I could see them. They moved with a strange, jerking gait, head tilted at an unnatural angle, arms hanging limp. I don't know what possessed me to speak, but I did. Are you E. Marsh? The figure stopped mid-step. Slowly, so slowly, they turned their head toward me. I couldn't see their face clearly, just the suggestion of features in the darkness. But I saw their eyes. Reflective, like an animal's, catching the light from my phone. You can see me, the figure said, voice filled with something between surprise and sadness. I couldn't respond. Couldn't move. Most can't anymore, they continued. It's been so long since someone could see me. They took a step toward me. I finally found my legs and ran. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment with every lock engaged. The next morning, I gave Mr. Pacheco my 30-day notice. I didn't care about losing my deposit. I didn't care that I had nowhere else lined up. I needed out of that building. He tried to talk me out of it. Whatever you think you saw. I'm leaving, I said firmly. He sighed. You're the fourth tenant to leave 4C in 2 years. I'll have to drop the rent again to fill it. Fourth. I hadn't been the first to see whatever was in 4B. I moved out 3 weeks later. I stayed with a friend until I found something else. I never went back to that building, not even to pick up my security deposit. About 6 months later, I ran into Mrs. Ling at a grocery store across town. She looked surprised to see me. I heard you left Riverside, she said. I did. She studied my face. You saw them, didn't you? Marsh. I nodded slowly. Most people can't, she said quietly. I've lived there 15 years and only saw them once, my first month there. They told me the same thing they probably told you. That they've been there so long, most people can't see them anymore. Like they're fading. What are they? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know. I don't think anyone does. Mr. Pacheco's father owned the building before him. Apparently E. Marsh was already there then in the 1970s. Same room, same condition. Why doesn't Pacheco do something? Because they pay rent. And because, well, I think he's afraid of what might happen if they leave. I never got a clear answer about E. Marsh. I looked up the name in old city records, obituaries, hospital records. Nothing definitive. The closest I found was an Ellis Marsh who was committed to a psychiatric facility in 1962 and disappeared from records in 1987. Whether that's the same person, I don't know. But I know what I saw in that hallway. Something that had been there so long it was barely part of our world anymore. Something caught between existing and fading away. I live in a different neighborhood now, in a newer building with bright hallways and plenty of neighbors I actually see during the day. I don't hear unexplained footsteps. I don't smell that sickly sweet decay. But sometimes late at night I think about Marsh still pacing that hallway. Still waiting for someone who can see them. Still fading a little more with each passing year until one day maybe they'll be completely invisible. And I wonder if that's a mercy or a curse. And here we are at the end of today's video. I want to thank everyone who has submitted their stories. I try to highlight experiences that not only send chills but also offer a lesson we can take from real life. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I enjoy sharing them, and I'm grateful for your trust in letting us explore these true, unsettling encounters together.